Welcome to the Real News Network. My name is Gregory Wilpert, and I'm coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. Peru is holding elections this coming Sunday, April 10th. According to most polls, the conservative candidate Keiko Fujimori, who is also the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, is leading the polls with 30 to 40% of the vote. Tied for second place are somebody called Pedro Pablo Kuczynski and Veronica Mendoza. Kuczynski is a center-right politician with a long political trajectory in Peru, having served as minister under former President Alejandro Toledo. And Veronica Mendoza is, on the other hand, is a complete newcomer to Peruvian politics, and she is the candidate of the left. She emerged from obscurity and now has a real chance of making the runoff with Keiko Fujimori, should Fujimori fail to make the 50% of the vote. So with us today to talk about the different candidates and the political situation in Peru is Gerardo Renique. He is originally from Peru and is currently professor of history at the City College of New York, specializing in Peruvian and Mexican history. Thanks for joining us, Gerardo.
Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
Great. So let's start with the situation with the elections. For a while, it looked like the elections might even be canceled because several candidates were disqualified for various irregularities in their campaigning and in their nomination process. What's going on? Is this still going to be a mostly free and fair election on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, the election, I pretty much think is going to be a free and an open election. But, what it's, an important thing to remark here is that there's a campaign, a systematic campaign by the press, the media, against the candidate of the left, Veronica Mendoza. And in the case of the disqualification of the two candidates, they were, both of the candidates, they have lied in their CVs. They were using irregular money, and they were caught distributing, money in some of the events. But the problem is that the same, the left have presented evidence, of Fujimori doing the same. However, she hasn't been disqualified from the election. So in a certain way, there's some favoritism there towards Fujimori. But overall, I think it's going to be an election that, at the time of the vote and the counting of the vote, it's going to be, clean and free.
So let's look briefly at the candidates and what they stand for. First, the frontrunner Keiko Fujimori. She's the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, as I mentioned, who is currently serving a 25-year prison sentence for crimes he committed during his presidency, which lasted from 1990 to 2000, and also included a so-called self-coup. Also, many suspect that Keiko is linked to the drug cartels. How is it that somebody like that, with this kind of father and where these suspicions with drug cartels, how is it that somebody like that could be leading in the polls in Peru right now?
Okay, there are two, first of all, you need to take into account, let's talk first who's behind Fujimori. I mean, Fujimori is the candidate that it's the favorite of the most extreme right wing in Peru. And he represents also the interests of all this sector that emerged during Fujimori, what we can call new rich people, new entrepreneurs, politicians that have rallied around Fujimori. Now, what Keiko Fujimori has a following among this sector, and he has a very important support among the lowest, the poorest sectors of the urban population, particularly in the city of Lima, that concentrates, almost a fourth of the population in Peru. And that popularity have its origins during the 10-year, regime of Fujimori that overlapped with a war, between the armed forces and the insurgency of Shining Path that generated tremendous polarization, insecurity, killing of popular leaders, kidnappings. So in that atmosphere, Fujimori was seen among these populations as the pacifier. And, the last stage of the counterinsurgency took place in shanty towns where poor people live. And on the other hand, Fujimori created all this clientelistic system. During his regime, he created all these low-paid jobs that in a certain way offer some relief. And Keiko Fujimori, have during the last years, he have maintained an organization in these shanty towns that pretty much, parallels and is very similar to the type of clientelism that is practiced, by the official institutional revolutionary party in Mexico. It's based on the distribution of food, the distribution of coupons for supermarkets, the distribution of coupons that can be redeemed for buying, electrical appliances in stores that belong to supporters of Fujimori. So that is what explains, the popularity of Keiko Fujimori. But on the other hand, you need to take in consideration also that there's and if Fujimori became popular, it's because there are two elements that are very important, that are two important characteristics of the Peruvian landscape at this moment. There's a very strong anti-Fujimori feeling on one hand, and on the other hand, it's a very strong anti-left-wing feeling. So Fujimori and the press, they galvanize, they prey on this izquierdismo, anti-left-wing feeling, and they rally around Fujimori. But on the other hand, the sudden rise of Veronica Mendoza can be explained, by the anti-Fujimori feeling. You know what I'm saying? On one hand, anti-izquierdismo, on the other hand, anti-Fujimorismo. The interesting thing is that for the first time we have two, Keiko Fujimoris. It's 40 years old, and Veronica. That's another factor. Veronica. That's why Veronica. Something that plays also in the favor of Veronica Mendoza. It's a woman, and she's younger than Keiko by 4 years. She's 36 years old. So that explains the part of the popularity of Keiko Fujimori.
Yeah, let's go. That brings us right to Veronica Mendoza. I mean, she seems to have come out of nowhere. You mentioned she's only 36 years old and now actually has a chance of making the runoff. What's going on with the left in Peru? I mean, for a long time, it seemed like, at first President Ollanta Humala was going to represent the left, but then he completely backtracked on that. Now she's coming. Is there a chance, do you think, that of her making the runoff? And where is she coming from? Who is she representing?
First of all, the results of this election are very uncertain. And the last 3 elections in Peru have been very uncertain. Before getting into Mendoza, right? First of all, the last 3 elections in Peru, the election after the fall of Fujimori. Fujimori ruled Peru for 10 years between 1990 and the year 2000. The 3 presidents that have been elected, Alejandro Toledo in 2001, Alan Garcia in 2006, and Ollanta Humala in 2011. Those 3 candidates ran on electoral platforms that were center-left. Alan Garcia not as leftist as Humala, and Toledo more to the center than Garcia. But those 3 candidates win with the support of the left. That's one consideration. The second, element to take regarding now going into Veronica Mendoza, right? Veronica Mendoza, he started his political career in the campaign of Ollanta Humala as a member of the Nationalist Party, Humala's party. But a few months, and the listeners of this program should be aware, Humala is elected as a leftist, center-left candidate, and within 2-3 months he turns to the right. He fires, he dismisses all his left-wing supporters and cabinet members, and a number of parliamentarians that were elected under the Humala, they start. They became independent, and they forged an alliance with the left. Veronica Mendoza was a member of parliament, and he was, a prominent member of this, minority group of left-wing progressive parliamentarians, right? That's one. Now, on the left, what has happened with the left, right? It's that in the last 10, 15 years, what we've seen is the emergence of a younger generation of leftists, a younger generation of leftists that kept the distance from the established left that gave the support to Humala, to Garcia, and Toledo. You need also to take in consideration that during the war and the counterinsurgency, the left, Peru had a very strong left, during the 80s and in the early 90s. That left, it's, depleted. It's depleted by the war, and it's ideologically defeated by neoliberalism. And so what we see in the last 15, 20 years is an emergence of a very vibrant popular movement, particularly, in outside of Lima, in the regions that had an impact of extractive industry, mining, oil industry. And on the other hand, we've been witnessing in the last 2 years, a very strong youth movement, like the social environmental movement outside the capital of Lima, that leans toward the left, but doesn't endorse, the left. So out of that, those movements have emerged a number of political formations. One of those is Tierra y Libertad. That is a left-wing formation with a very strong environmental element. And on the other hand, a youth movement, the movement that supports Mendoza, and Mendoza is a member of this movement, is a youth movement in alliance with social movements. It's very, very young people, and that has been very active in creating this Frente Amplio, or broad front, that is supporting Mendoza. So what we have in this broad front is this younger generation of left-wing political formations, local regional movements, collectives, and a sector of the all left that as individuals are participating, in this effort to run an independent left-wing candidate. Now, unlike the previous, the last 3 elections, this is the first time that the left is running independent. It's not running in support of an Humala that was a nationalist on the center left. It's not running in support of Toledo that ran a center left platform, in 2001, or it's not in support of Alan Garcia that ran in an anti-neoliberal, social democratic type of platform and turned to the right a few months after taking office. So that's the panorama on the left. And on the other hand, what we've seen with Vero Mendoza, very similar to what's happening with Bernie Sanders in the US. Vero Mendoza started her campaign with 2% of preference in the polls. And at the moment, she's, in a tight second with the other right-wing candidate, between 15 to 17%. So that's the situation at the moment. And, Peru has this law, Peru has a ballotage system. It's very unlikely that Fujimori would be able to win the election in the first, this coming Sunday. She will need 51%. That's going to be impossible. So more likely it's going to be a second round of votes that is going to be between Keiko Fujimori. And again, it's uncertain who's going to come second. It might be, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. I'll talk about him in a minute, or Vero Mendoza. That's the situation in Peru. But again, the other element that it's a very substantial, between 20 to 25% of the voters are not, they haven't decided who they're going to vote to. So it's the final result, as I'm telling you, is uncertain. And I don't.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's such a large percentage of undecided voters. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to the other right-wing candidate, Pedro Kuczynski, but we'll see what happens, and then maybe after the election we can talk again, depending on what happened on Sunday. But unfortunately, we've run out of time right now. So thanks so much for joining us, Gerardo.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, and thank you for watching the Real News Network.